Music.
Going to give it one more minute, and then to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm again very happy to have all of you join us today. We are excited to have you, to welcome you to our 2022 annual meeting of the National Human Services Assembly. My name is Victor Valentine. I am the Executive Director here at the Assembly, and again, welcoming you to a meeting where we hope to be able to discuss and bring further to light, the conversation on workforce challenges throughout our human services sector. Again, we're bringing more information forward. We know that this is a crisis that is longstanding, that has multiple facets to it. I'm really pleased to have a wonderful group of speakers and experts that kind of build a larger view picture of some of the outstanding issues. But I would like to say that we're not using this conversation as an end-all be-all. We at the Assembly have taken this issue on as a critical strategic priority of ours, and you'll hear a little bit more about that a little later. But we intend for this to be a jump off to more conversations. We have peer councils and other opportunities where you can join in, where some of the more the intimate conversations and the critical conversations, and hopefully from those where we're going to have areas where we can leverage our collective voices to maybe make some positive impact. So before we get started, I want to make sure that we do a little bit of housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded, and a link will be sent out along with some other follow-up information once the session is over. We're going to send some data and some information because we expect this conversation to be pretty robust, and we want to make sure that we're capturing all of that. And for those of you who have both registered and participated, give you kind of a roll up. So please be on the lookout in the next week or so prior to, after post this meeting. I would encourage you to set your view to speaker. One of the things we wanted to do, obviously, is have a meeting like this in person, but we're still facing multiple challenges with COVID, and hope next year we will be able to have this meeting in person where we can shake hands, hug, and do all the things that human beings haven't been able to do over the last few years. But instead of a webinar, we wanted to kind of open it up, to be more of as if we were in the same room. But for efficiency's sake, if you want to set your view to speaker, that way, whenever a contributor is presenting, you'll be able to really see them up close because, most of the time it will be a shared screen with the PowerPoint. All attendees are muted for the presentation. If for some reason you look and your microphone is not muted, please put it on mute. That would be very helpful. And I want to encourage you and invite you after our panelists and our presenters speak to hang around about for half an hour after the main session is over. We will not have an opportunity to do a question and answer while we're doing our round robin panel discussion, but each of our speakers has agreed to stay a little while longer to field a few questions as we're able to do that. And I'll encourage you to put those in the chat feature, particularly because those questions that do not get answered or addressed, we want to be able to do that in subsequent meetings. So here's a our agenda for today, we're going to have some opening remarks from our immediate past chair, Jeff Fleischer. I will give a brief year in review because this is our annual meeting, and I think it's good to be able to take a look back, particularly as we are in our 99th year and setting up for our centennial next year. That's where you'll hear a little bit about our strategic priorities, particularly how we plan to address those things. I'll introduce our panelists, and then they'll go give a brief introduction of themselves, their organizations, and some critical work that they're doing. And then we'll get right into the meat of the particular discussion and theme, which is addressing the human workforce crisis. And again, we have speakers and experts from the continuum of this subject matter who will be able to kind of give multiple perspectives on it. And then I'm happy to say that our new chair, Darlene Bailey, is going to give us some closing remarks and talk about how we can stay in good trouble. And for those who joined us last year, we had HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra come in as our keynote, and he encouraged us to get into some good trouble. And we've kind of taken that theme and we're running with it. And so, again, because we're talking about a very heavy issue, it's important to be able to set the stage, talk about what some of the challenges are, think about ways that we can positively impact that crisis, but leave on a good note and an encouraging note. Because quite honestly, me as the executive director working with a phenomenal board, great staff, awesome partners, we want to stay enthusiastic as I say, we're standing and staying on that wall. And again, I'm inviting you to hang out a little bit afterwards for what we're calling the sector speak out session. And then we will give you back to your days. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who's going to give us some opening remarks and kind of set us on our way. Jeff?
Thanks, Vic. I'm just going to take 3 minutes or so to some opening remarks. As Vic mentioned, next year, the Assembly will celebrate its 100th anniversary. So we're just sort of a fledgling organization after all these years. 3 years ago, before the pandemic, the board of directors of the Assembly decided to stop, do a new assessment, do some planning, and come up with a new direction of where we needed to go, where the sector really needed to go, and what role that we could play. So we came up with a new strategic plan. We hired a new executive director in Vic Valentine. He's just a little bit over a year so far in his tenure. We got and recruited some more energized board members, and we decided on 3 areas of focus. The first is diversity, equity, and inclusion, as it refers to our own practice as nonprofit human service organizations, our board diversity with our board of directors, and our senior staff. And also how we deliver our services through the lens of equity. The second focus is our youth justice equity. We really look at this as one of the civil rights issues of our time, where Black and brown kids are more harshly treated in our juvenile justice system than their white counterparts. They're overrepresented in the cages that our government builds for these children. And we feel that human services, no matter what you're providing, what kind of a service you're providing, we all need to jump on board on this basic issue of the community needs to really reach out and embrace our young people and our families and really prevent incarceration and out-of-home placements the best that we can do. And the third area of focus is equity regarding human service frontline staff. Our frontline staff in most human service organizations are most diverse, but they're also our least paid, our least compensated, have the least benefits, and are working in the most harsh and difficult positions in the field. So we really want to take a look at our frontline staff through a lens of equity as well. So this morning we had elections. I'm stepping down as the chair after 3 years. Darlene Bailey is our new chair, and you'll hear from her later on. We have 2 vice presidents, Mala Thakur from MDC and Manisha Kapila from ProInspire. Our secretary is Denise Harlow from the Community Action Partnerships. And our new treasurer is Susan Tomlinson Schmidt from the Leadership Alliance. We also have, I just want to thank our other board members, Susan Danish, who was a former chair, Peter Burns, who's the chair of our governance committee, he's the CEO of the ARC of the United States. Francis Kuhnreiter, who's the co-director of the Building Movement Project and a chair of our Fund and Development Committee. Jennifer Hawkins, the corporate secretary and chief of staff of the American Red Cross. Melanie Lockwood, our executive director of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, and Lupi Quinteros-Grady, president and CEO of the Latin American Youth Center. So you can see we're pretty much heavy hitters here. We have a fantastic board, and I just really want to thank our board of directors and our members for working together the last 3 years. Very exciting time. And now we're really set and poised to make an impact. So I'll end there and give it back to Vic to move the program forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeff, and really appreciate that. And I just want to say I'm really excited. First of all, I'm grateful for Jeff, your leadership over the past few years in setting the table for me coming in as the executive director last year, but also, providing a foundation for us not only to solidify the work that we're doing, but being poised for growth. I'm also very excited about the new slate of officers, many of which I've worked with in different capacities, but really anticipating the continuation of the great work and the infusion of a different type of energy, not better, but a different type of energy as we take on some of the challenges. And I would also say, as we invite many of you participating on this call to link up with us and join us in the work that we're doing. Again, Jeff mentioned we are a small but powerful and pretty young organization at 99 years old. But I think it's important. We won't look back here, at all 99 years, but I think it's important that we kind of look at where we've been in the last year. Again, like all organizations, the Assembly had to take a hard look at who it was and what it was about. And COVID really impacted us in the ways that it impacts many of you and continues to do so as we recover from it. But I am happy to say that over the last year, again, in no small part to the leadership of Jeff and the board, but as much to do with the energetic, expert, and tireless staff that I get to work with, every day. We've been able to do a few things. And so I would say that, it's always good to look at accomplishments in multiple ways. I have a little bit of data, or analytics inside of me. So I tend to want to look at things in terms of numbers. And what I presented are just a few. This is not all encompassing of the highlights that we were able to get to over the last year. Again, taking into account what Jeff talked about, our priorities being, racial equity, diversity and inclusion, youth justice. There are things like public policy. There's helping in supporting frontline workers. There's also us looking at how we can support the leadership across our organizations. And we do this in so many different ways. And one of the other ways that we do that hasn't been mentioned yet is, I've always said that show me your priorities in an organization by showing me your line items, your financial priorities. And one of the ways that we've been able to successfully support organizations is through our group purchasing program, Purchasing Point, which helps organizations save money for its mission. And so I would invite you to link up with us, whether it's you're interested in membership, whether you're interested in joining one of our many discussions and peer councils, or you just want more information and ultimately sign up to be a part of our Purchasing Point program. But I'll go through a couple of main numbers that I think all of us can be proud of here at the Assembly. We really have planted our flag in the youth diversion space and co-sponsored the Unlock Beyond Bars web series. That's a continuing web series led by and hosted by many of the folks on this call today. And as that work continues, I would encourage you to investigate ways you can support that. Again, we've begun in earnest over the last year, our virtual peer councils, where again, a lot of the work is being done. A lot of the hard conversations are being had, and we're working towards what are some ways that a network as vast as the assemblies and its partners might be able to leverage its voice. So far we've had over 200 people participate on those. Again, we are heavily steeped in not just talking about the work of the assembly, but the assembly is the work of our members. And so it is important for us to promote the work of you all within both our membership and those of you who are our partners. And we do this in multiple ways, but our communications have reached over 7,000 people over the last year through our newsletters, through our individual email communications. And we see that as a core component of our work. And we're going to continue to do that. Again, I mentioned, the work around purchasing point. We've got over 200 participating vendors. And I also want to make sure that, again, it's really about supporting diversity and equity across multiple areas. And inside of the purchasing point program, we do this by emphasizing and highlighting minority and women-owned vendors who are providing really needed expertise and great goods and services. So I just wanted to put some of those numbers for you to take a look at. The next slide I'm going to show you is a very important one because it's not just about doing the work, it's also about being very effective of being stewards over the resources that come in-house. And again, over the last 3 years, what you're seeing is a 3-year comparison of some of our highlights from a financial standpoint. I'm happy to say that we are a stable organization, yet we are poised for growth, and we will be pursuing avenues for us to do just that from a financial standpoint. Again, even in the midst of COVID, the downturn in our economy, we have been able to move upon an upward tick in the way that we're operating and the resources that are coming in. And so you can kind of see the numbers there. What I will say is that the staff and I have been tirelessly working not just on how to bring revenue in, but how we can be better and more efficient in operating so that we can be lean and mean. And again, being great stewards over the resources that are coming in the door. We have completely embraced technology, the technologies that are available. COVID made liars out of many of us when we thought we could do business as usual in the same ways. Again, as we're looking at from a diversification standpoint, particularly in workforce, we have moved to a virtual model of operations, though we do have in-person, interactions when called for. And that is something that if many of you who are on the recruitment trail trying to backfill and/or as you're expanding, that's a next generation strategy for being able to, encourage, recruit, hire, onboard, and retain new talent as we continue to build our benches. So we're trying to eat off the same table that we're serving from in that way. Briefly, I'll talk about, Jeff has already talked about, what our priorities are. Really briefly, this is a synopsis of how we plan to accomplish that work. We're going to be advocates and for increasing financial support to human service organizations. Unlike many organizations that may focus on the communities directly, we're here as a backbone organization to support the people who are doing the work. And the organizational infrastructures of those great community organizations that are out there meeting the needs of our most vulnerable populations. We want to expand and diversify our organizational membership going into our next 100 years. We want to expand our tent so that we can be as reflective of the communities that we are serving in every neighborhood, every community across America. If you look at who is a part of our membership, we want to continue to identify workable solutions and strategies to divert youth from the juvenile justice system. Again, we are promoting racial equity, diversity, and inclusion amongst human services leadership. That's the C-suite. That's the board of directors. That's the folks who are probably providing consultation to your organizations. Are they reflective of the way that the country is moving? I always use in trainings. I always use this as a kind of an icebreaker around racial equity. Now that we're on Zoom, if you were to take a snapshot of your Zoom screen, would you be proud to distribute that amongst your partners, amongst your funders, amongst those you want to bring into the fold? And if the answer is not quite, then there's a road to travel. And we here at the Assembly are committed to doing just that and assisting you all to do that as well. And again, overall supporting the sector through issue-related convenings, public policy, our group purchasing program, cross-promoting the work that you're doing, sharing knowledge, and where we can as a small but powerful team, providing direct technical assistance to assist you all. So for more information, I'm putting this up. Please feel free to contact Melissa, our Director of Learning and Member Engagement, if you're interested in membership. I think that we're putting in a chat a link to a one-pager that talks about the value added that being a member of the National Human Services affords you. So please take a look at that and reach out. She stands ready, willing, and able to have those initial conversations with you all. And if you are interested in joining our Purchasing Point program and begin saving more resources towards your mission, Ruth, who is our managing director for that program, also stands ready, willing, and able to assist you in that way. So with that, I'm going to go into our panel discussion. Again, I am extremely fortunate to be able to invite and have these folks accept the invitation to present today and to share just a few thoughts around this critical issue of our workforce shortage. I have the privilege of working with some on a more regular basis, but even in getting to know some of the others, iron sharpens iron. And as I continue along my own continuum, my own journey within this work, I'm just privileged. It's almost like being in a working PhD program, being able to sit, listen, and learn from folks I call colleagues. And so I'm very excited to be able to introduce our 5 panelists today who have taken their time out of their extremely busy schedules to participate. The first is Denise Harlow, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Community Action Partnership. And as you saw, she is a longstanding board member for the National Human Services Assembly and has just been named secretary. Really excited to have her aboard in all of those capacities. She's been with the partnership since 2011. She was the CEO of the New York State Community Action Association and Senior Vice President for Capacity Building for the New York Council of Nonprofits, which means, like me, I also come from the capacity building world. She is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to knowing how to support organizations. She graduated with a social work degree from Valparaiso and has a master's degree in social work from the University at Albany, and really happy that she's here with us. I'm going to introduce all 5 of our panelists and then again circle back around to give each one of them a couple of minutes to talk about themselves and their organizations. So next, we have Lupi Quinteros-Grady, who is the president and CEO of the Latin American Youth Center with 20 years of youth development experience. She's implemented a variety of programs such as Upward Bound and AmeriCorps. She was appointed to the Maryland Governor's Commission on Service and Volunteerism. She's originally from El Salvador and was not originally an English speaker, but has taken that and turned that into such a strength that she has received her master's degree in bilingual and special education from George Washington and her bachelor's degree from Goucher. She's been a critical thought partner in many areas with regarding not just youth and youth work, but just helping me have a good perspective on the landscape for a lot of frontline workers. Then we have Dr. Marianne Haley, who is affectionately known as Mimi, who's the director of the National Youth Employment Coalition. And she is currently co-chair of the governor's DEI task force in Connecticut, the subcommittee on youth. Prior to joining the coalition, she served as deputy director of the CT of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. She's an adjunct professor. She's a published author on finance and democracy. That's probably some interesting reading right there. And she's worked as a senior nonprofit manager for organizations in foster care, justice involved in disconnected youth. And she comes to us with an undergrad degree from University of Notre Dame and a doctorate from New York University. I'm really glad to have her here. Karen Johnson is the Senior Director of Change in Mind with Social Current, a member, another member of our association of the Assembly. She leads the development of the Social Current Change in Mind Institute, leveraging the latest advances in neurosciences and trauma-informed approaches. She brings a knowledge of advancing science around resilience, brain development, adversity, toxic stress, equity, and trauma-informed approaches to the complex challenges we face. 27 years of experience in child welfare, and she is a licensed clinical social worker, certified in Dr. Brene Brown's Dare to Lead and Daring Way, and trained in Dr. Bruce Berry's neurosequential model of therapeutics. Really excited to have this particular perspective with us today. And rounding out our panel is Nicole Jorwic, who is a 2022 appointee of President Biden's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. She's the Chief of Advocacy and Campaigns at Caring Across Generations. Before that, she was the Senior Director of Public Policy and Senior Executive Officer of State Advocacy for the ARC of the United States. She comes to us, with experience on federal advocacy and policy, first working in Illinois, and she is an accomplished special education attorney and an advocate for students with disabilities and their families. So when I look at this panel, we've got presidents and CEOs, we've got professors, we've got authors, we've got scientists, we've got advocates, and we've got attorneys. I really couldn't have asked for anything better than that. So what I'm going to do now is just ask each one of them, and I'll start with you, Denise, to just give us a little bit more beyond what was on the screen and what I've said about you, your work, and what you think is important for the panel to know.
Thanks, Victor, and thank you so much, everyone, for being part of today's conversation. And I hope that we do have a chance to converse later in the session here today. Many folks across today's webinar and across the country are working hard every day to serve families. And Vicky, you talked about the range of experience around the panelist tables. There's so much experience also in the room. And as a social worker by training, as a former frontline worker, I understand a bit, but I don't understand today's frontline worker. The challenges that everyone who is attending here today is facing. What you're facing is a unique moment in time. And I look forward to today's conversation as we talk about this unique moment. And I run across people every day across America who've worked for a community action agency somewhere with a network of 1,000 agencies. Community action is in every corner of America. And I hope that if you're not working with your local CAP, that you reach out to me. I'm happy to connect you. But Vic, I really look forward to today's conversation.
Outstanding. Thank you, Denise. Lupi, would you like to share?
It is also great to be here today. I'm excited to have this conversation. I think it's much needed. The Latin American Youth Center has been around 54 years, and like many of the nonprofits, it never closed its doors when the pandemic took place, and there was just I think a theme of adapting and just really being nimble or creative in so many ways, growing in unexpected ways where the demands kept were needed based on what the community needs were, and still are. And so I think it's a good time and a good space to have some reflection. No easy answers. I think it is a very difficult time still for direct service providers in different industries, definitely the nonprofit sector. And I think that, you know, it's going to be interesting to see where things are in the next year or two. I don't think they're going to get any better anytime soon. So I think it's really important for us to wrap our minds around, you know, sort of potentially like what becomes doable. I know I've just been really trying to understand how to make things doable for our staff that never stopped working. And so there's definitely a mental fatigue that I'm concerned about our workforce. And then yet there is, we want to make sure we are present for the community as the needs have not stopped or continue to grow in many ways. So great to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Lupi, and looking forward to hearing you expand and on some of that as well. Mimi, would you like to kind of briefly reintroduce yourself and give us a little bit more about you?
Sure. Thank you, Vic. That was such a nice introduction. And I just want to say it's been such a pleasure getting to know you and your organization. I'm relatively new as well in the position here at the National Youth Employment Coalition. And it is just heartwarming to have partners like you. So many thanks. And I'm excited to also meet many colleagues here today. So the National Youth Employment Coalition is a member agency as well. And for those of you that might not be familiar with us, we basically support the youth employment field and beyond, really focusing on youth that our systems have disconnected, and we have disconnected. We often say disconnected youth or opportunity youth, but I think in many ways that also speaks to the youth taking the disconnection, but I think that our systems are the ones that have let them fall through the cracks. And so really focusing on those young people that have not had the opportunities that we would like. And we support the field. We do a lot of training, technical assistance, policy and advocacy work, and youth leadership. And I agree with my colleagues. I think this is a unique period in history. I think we're all feeling it. You just turn on the news and like if you've been around for a while, that this is kind of crazy time. And at the same time, I think that, while there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of great opportunities too. And we are now in this position, from the employment front where we have very low unemployment, and we do have, businesses and, corporations and folks that are really interested in ways that they haven't been interested before in kind of reshaping policies, both in hiring and retention and things like that. But the challenges are very real. So I'm looking forward to the discussion and to hearing all of your thoughts today as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Mimi. Karen, would you like to give us a little bit more about yourself and your work?
Yes, thank you so much, Victor. It's wonderful to be here, and really appreciate being able to meet my fellow panelists today and learn from everyone who's sharing. I think, as a social worker who worked almost 20 years on the direct service side in foster care and with youth aging out of care and also in community-based services, it was in that work that in the organization I was at in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that I really started to learn more about how, as we're trying to be trauma informed, we need to, and we're using all those principles with everyone we serve, we need to also apply those principles and that lens in our parallel processes with the people we serve next to. So I've been privileged to work in the trauma-informed space. After I left the direct services side, worked for the National Council for Behavioral Health, now the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. They changed their name. Worked for them for 5.5 years, partnering with organizations across the country who striving to become trauma-informed, and really understood that the focus of that is about our workforce as much as it is about serving the people that our workforce partners with. And then I'm, a year ago joined Social Current. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Social Current, but Social Current is a merger between Alliance for Strong Families and Communities and the Council on Accreditation. And, we're really excited for our newly formed organization, because together with thousands of social sector leaders, we're focusing on activating the power of the social sector. And in our work, we offer a range of services and learning opportunities focused on policy, advocacy, knowledge exchange, certification, accreditation, but we are focusing also and very passionate on workforce resilience. So I'm grateful to be able to be here today to share what we are really prioritizing in our work. And I think what others have said, a focus moving beyond what we've learned, a focus on what we've learned in the past 27 months. What we know is we need to move beyond perhaps what we did before the pandemic, which was top-down employee recognition, self-care initiatives, which are part of the puzzle, but they don't go far enough. And we need to move into a place of partnering side by side with our staff to create environments in which staff can be well, even while doing this really difficult work. So this is yes, I agree with everyone's statements that this is a unique time we find ourselves in, and I think we can do this. We can move this work forward, and I'm really excited to be here today, both to share, but most also to learn, and really from everyone who's part of our panel. So thank you so much, Victor.
Thank you, Karen. And again, really looking forward to your unique perspective on this particular issue. And Nicole, do you want to jump in and tell us a little bit more?
Sure. Thanks so much. Really glad to be here. Nicole Jorwic. And in addition to my professional background, and thank you, Victor, for sharing it, I also have been a direct care provider. Those were some of my first jobs. And when I talk about direct care provider, I'm talking about providing direct service to people with disabilities. That can also be home care worker, job coaches. It can have a lot of different names. And frankly, that's one of the complicated factors. The workforce that supports people with disabilities and aging adults has been in a crisis for decades. Well before the pandemic, it's really has been a rolling crisis that at this point is catastrophic. That doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities, but because of the huge lack of investment over time, we're talking about jobs that literally make other jobs possible, that are predominantly done by women of color, that nationally the wages are less than $12 an hour. And so we need to really address that when it comes to the needs of individuals who in our communities might need the most support. And that's really kind of what fuels me in the work that I do. And part of that is also because I'm a family member. I have a brother that has autism. I also am on the care team for my grandma who has Parkinson's. And so it's something that I think a lot of folks have the need for the work that these workers do, but not a lot of folks are engaged in making sure that those jobs are good jobs. So there's a lot of opportunities there. I think there's a lot of opportunities for pipeline programs from community colleges and other things, and also really important connections into immigration policy and addressing some of these really important needs. In addition to my professional work and my personal connection, I also serve on the board for the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals, which is one type of workforce that supports people with disabilities. And so this is something that I'm really committed to, and that we are on the precipice of finding some answers, because I kind of have been saying that the pandemic has let the genie out of the bottle, and we're not going to let it back in terms of really highlighting the needs here, but that we want to make sure that we're not just filling these positions, that we're making these jobs good jobs as well. And so that's really what drives a lot of the work that we're doing at Caring Across Generations, and that I'm doing in different parts of my life as well. So glad to be here and glad to be part of the conversation, because there's big problems, there's big opportunities for growth. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate you you talking both about the challenges and opportunities, as well as sharing a little bit about you personally, because I think if we were able to open this up, and or if we were in a a conference center, or the conversations that would be happening in between sessions and networking, you would get a lot of folks being able to share and telling their stories about either their lived experience or lived expertise around some of these things. So I appreciate you bringing that out. And I think, I can speak for many folks here, including myself, that there's a personal aspect to what we're talking about as well, not just a professional one. So with that said, I'm going to give it back to Denise to now get a little bit deeper into what we're here to talk about. And I've asked Denise, who has done a phenomenal job helping us frame the conversation at the assembly, to help do something similar for us here right now, and talk about the issue from a broader perspective and from her perspective. So Denise, help us understand a little bit more the breadth and the width of what we're talking about.
Thanks, Vic, and thank you to all the panelists. I think folks really kind of set the table in a lot of different ways. What is it? The research shows that when people hear the word human services, they think emergency food distribution. I think that's what the Frameworks Institute showed probably about 10 years ago in terms of some of their research. And so someone mentioned some of the confusion, right? In terms of when we say human service workers, there's such a variety of terms. There's such a variety of types of organizations and the type of services that fit within this human services ecosystem, if we want to frame it that way. And this moment in time has such incredible pressure being put on all systems. But in today's conversation, we want to talk about that particular intense pressure on that human services ecosystem. From the beginning of COVID, human service workers, for the most part, have never been able to shut their doors. Community action agencies, which I know very much about specifically, are the ones who have the emergency drive-through, who are having to navigate emergency assistance to make sure that all these government programs that are flowing down from the government were getting spread to families and into the hands of families who needed those services. They're what families who are and human service folks who are front lines, meaning, hands-on with families, hands-on with seniors, persons with differing abilities. The teams of folks that the organizations around today's table represents have not had the ability to work behind the scenes in front of a camera at all times. Now, have some human service workers that we've been able to navigate some of this hybrid environment, certainly in some places. But this pressure on the workforce, we're seeing it at the local agency grassroots level. We're seeing it state government level in the human services divisions. We're seeing it at the federal government in human services divisions, public entities, and nonprofit CBO entities. Now, I know 25 years ago, right, Bridgespan started putting out stuff about the pending numbers of employees to replace the retiring boomers that were going to happen way down the line. Well, we know we're also in the midst of the retirement phases. I think 13 years ago during the Great Recession, a lot of folks who had planned on retiring paused it because of the economic impact. After the Great Recession kind of abated, not for all of society, especially those that we serve, but as the country moved forward, we saw people retiring. But that retirement baby boom generation laid on top of today's workforce crisis, the numbers are incredibly challenging. And what we're also seeing with some of those retirements and with people who come in and for whatever reasons, and we can talk a little bit about this, then pivot out again, we're seeing a loss of infrastructural knowledge. We're seeing the lack of some folks who aren't giving perhaps this embedding in human services enough time to garner the experience that many of us understand it takes to understand how to navigate complex systems that the families we serve face or find themselves within. So there are multiple things facing this direction, but we're seeing I know in our network, we're seeing Head Start classrooms that aren't able to open, not because of COVID rates, but because there's not enough staff to drive the bus, to cook the meals, to have teachers in the classroom, or enough aides to make sure the parent to child rate or the adult to child ratio are appropriate. We know we have crews who aren't able to go in weatherized homes because we just don't have enough people in those seats. And all of us are on the phone here today are really challenged by recruitment challenges, by pay, by salary limitations, by benefits. I'm going to put into the chat after I'm done speaking here. Hopefully many of you have seen the National Council of Nonprofits research that they've done on the scope and impact of the workforce shortage. And I know, Vic, you've put that into some of the newsletters that have gone out, so I'm sure many folks have seen this. But some of the primary reasons why they're saying that people aren't able to kind of get into the workforce, or we're experiencing some challenges, salary competition is number one. We all know that so many of our team members can go to Walmart, can go to Starbucks, can go to retail and make equivalent, if not more money, with perhaps less stress. Now, we could have the conversation about what happens if this recession conversation continues forward. What will that do to those sectors vis-a-vis our sector in terms of human services? But that might be a different webinar, Vic. But I think that is on the horizon for something else to be thinking about. But the salary competition is real. And we know there's legislation in pieces like this to do COLAs or to do bonus pay or hazard pay, but that doesn't necessarily fix it in the moment for sure. We know other issues are access to childcare. We know that in some places vaccination policies still may be rearing its head, but it seems like those might be abating a bit. But the costs that we're seeing in the news and all of us are experiencing personally around inflation are impacting potential employees as well. Housing costs, food costs, transportation costs. All of that is weighing on the human services sector in terms of being able to recruit staff and maintain staff. And one other piece before I turn it back over to our next speaker, Vic, is something that came out in the National Council of Nonprofits Association report that just really struck with me, is what can government do to mitigate some of these issues? And we know in the human services sector about government contracting. Those of us around this table who got government contracts, whether it's state government contracts, federal government contracts, expediency on getting contracts put into place, reimbursement rates that government, Medicaid, whether it's other governmental programs pay. I know when I think about the Head Start world, I think about the cost per child, I think about cost per unit, capitated rates, all those things have an impact. And then you have the indirect costs and the admin costs. And not all, the uniform guidance under OMB was supposed to be uniform. We know that's not the case. So even nonprofits who have an approved indirect cost rate don't always get that embedded. So there is so much pressure where I think policy and government could really help open that door a bit to reflect today's costs, to build in COLAs. We know a lot, we talk about money, and that is a reality of today's situation. So that was a lot of stuff to throw up on the wall for today's conversation. But for me, that's kind of the situation we're sitting in. There's pressure points from a lot of different directions. There's fewer folks perhaps in the workforce. And how are we able to navigate with competition that, again, today is competition. But if this recession comes down, we know where those pressure points will begin to increase on us as well. So I'll stop talking and we'll turn to the next speaker.
No, thank you, Denise. Again, like you said, it is a lot. There's a lot to digest. There's a lot to consider. And again, this is the continuation of a longer conversation that people are having around multiple tables, including us. So it's not going anywhere quickly, but there are opportunities. And we invite you to stay connected with us as we continue to talk about these things and work on solutions. I saw Lupi shaking her head a lot as you were speaking, co-signing much of what was being said. And so I'm going to invite you, Lupi, to kind of give us a little bit more drilled perspective on the effect, as Denise was speaking about, the effect on frontline workers. And from your perspective, however you want to address it, from a youth worker perspective, or in whichever way you think kind of helps us understand a little bit more what is really happening on the ground.
Thank you. I would probably just give a little bit of background. When I meant nonprofits didn't close the doors, like we did not close their doors. within 2 weeks, we restructured or had to create infrastructure we didn't have around food insecurity, delivering to 750 families a week, rotating our staff with volunteers, trying to make sure we were acquiring PPE when there wasn't any to acquire hardly, and then, addressing the rental assistance. The staff were sort of encouraged and mandated to really call out. We had our universe of 5,000 young people we serve. So really wanting to understand as the pandemic hit, where our families were, how were they being affected. So there are areas, of course, no surprise here, the food insecurity, rental assistance, the connecting to the internet, making sure our students, our young people work. This was March, where many families not connected. So here we were trying to coordinate all of these efforts at the same time. And of course, our mental health piece, which has doubled in numbers in regards to the needs there. So that's the stage of like where we jumped in. And of course, the crisis, you're hoping that is short term, not long term as it's been. And so I think that's the challenge where we find ourselves, that it has been this very fast and furious pace, where we're trying to, at the same time, when we're saying the complication or the compounded issues, even as direct service, you also have your own families you're attending to. The issues aren't not exempt to you or to your family of getting COVID or dealing with illnesses or taking care of elderly. So all of these things are in play throughout, these, definitely the first year. Then we sort of feel like there's a breather, or there is potentially this sort of pace that may be able to change with the horizon of seeing the vaccine. We learned, and we're going to this whole different campaign around trying to encourage our communities to learn about, the facts of the vaccines, knowing that it is their choice, but also running against seeing that our staff equally are concerned about taking the vaccine. So dive into policy, developing internal policy so that we can really speak and really buy in, campaigning first with our staff, and then moving into the community where we've been part of initiatives, campaigning, even last summer with 4 other nonprofits and campaigning, getting 5,000 families to, members to actually get vaccinated as a result of those campaigns. So just really responding in real time, because we're sort of seeing the implications, we're seeing that need. Conducting a survey that allows to gather information, and this was about 757 families. This was when we were really coming into the vaccine, thinking like, okay, let's see what's the hope. My concern was that as the vaccine and everyone was talking about opening up, where did that leave our families? And really making sure that the story was clear, the narrative wasn't lost, that like the demands and the challenges weren't going away for the communities that are low income, that actually did not have a buffer when the pandemic took place right away in so many different ways. And that if anything, the pandemic exacerbated issues that were already there. So where does that leave us? No easy answers, an ongoing trying to really wrestle with the issues, trying to retain talented staff, trying to really, even internally, it's interesting at this time, trying to, as a leader, not lose sight of long-term goals and trying to address short-term goals. It almost feels like you're all over the place, because you're trying to, okay, strategically, how am I supposed to be thinking about this organization? Just to give you a sense, as of 6/17/22, we have 197 employees, full-time 176, part-time 21, temps 15. We have American members. However, at any given time, when I've checked with HR, we've had about 20 to even up to 25 vacancies. And so where have we tried to, as a result, put some of our focus and energy? We call it the rallying cry on our HR efforts, trying to really look at how do we make sure we've looked at our job descriptions. Okay, this is too long. Is this really, we want to make sure who we're getting is mission focused. We understand we're trying to put the leadership in place so that we're actually more involved in trying to train a pipeline of leaders. We've done compensation packages. We've looked at how to look at retirement benefits. We had health insurance benefits in which we had the staff not pay any fees. We've done a bit of work to try to make sure that this package looks good in the retention. And even with that, to Denise's point, we're competing. There is just a lot of different choices. And even so, in some of the conversations I've been a part of it, like also there's a different change in how this generation is changing that workforce. And this is understanding sort of like what is the space can look like. And I think, you know, what our challenge has been is that you are looking at other jobs that can be virtual. And so there's some understanding like, well, it's better for me to direct service. You have to show up. You're in the community. We're working with young people. We're looking to connect. We're building a sense of belonging. The interesting observation as we came back from Omicron, and that really, by the way, that second wave really affected our staff mentally in a different way. I saw it. It was like we were getting ourselves right back into it, and you can see people feeling a bit more encouraged. And in Omicron, and you just saw this, it was this mental piece that really, it was like we're at this again, like the reality, the morale of that it is not going away anytime soon. Are you kidding me? And so that really just continued to complicate like us trying to build that morale, us trying to build that sense of community, and those challenges. How do you do that with virtual, hybrid, you know, in person? And so it has been a roller coaster. It's been quite a ride, and we are continuing to, you know, really, you know, just try to stay focused on the work. Like, to be honest, one of our initiatives just happening in the next couple of weeks is going to be around a survey in focus groups with youth. Why? Because that is our mission. Our focus is to help young people transition in healthy adulthood. What does that look like? And wanting to understand like the programming that we're providing, or the services or the resources, are they what young people are looking at? Making sure we're sort of keeping a pulse on what our communities are needing, and not losing sight of that. However, really looking within around the talent, around sort of the pipeline, value and lived experience. That's an area too that we've been really focused on, making sure that you know, that the staff, especially it is a majority staff of color, if they don't have those degrees, not sort of dismissing the experience that they have in working, especially at this time where we need staff that can connect with our young people and our families in a way where it creates that safe space. And so it has been an intense time. My biggest concern is really around the fatigue of the staff and trying to figure out morale, building that up when we're right now gearing up for summer programs. So it's not going to be a downturn. So just doing that, but like, and then and seeing where the staff take initiative. We literally had a staff picnic about 3 weeks ago, and it was initiated by the staff. I was super encouraged. There was a lot of hesitancy from some folks, and then other people are ready to go. That's the other part. But when we all came together, interested by the end of the day, people felt so encouraged. And I feel like there is a need to connect as well. And so I'm hoping that we're continuing to really learn and move in a direction where we create those opportunities more and more to build our staff and care for them. But I know that, you know, right now, like I have a retreat coming in that is going to be with the senior team to discuss strategy. And one of the facilitator, of course, was sort of like, what is this KPIs? And I'm looking, yes, I want to make sure I'm focused on these, you know, measures. At the same time, I want to make sure that the capacity is there, because we can do this trick on ourselves. We're trying to respond to the needs, and the capacity is not there. And right now, as Denise said, it's a very unique, and it's a different way in which we have to look at how we are leading, what we're paying attention to our staff, and at the same time, continuing to like not lose sight of long term, like how can we put other things in place to continue to build compensation, like the various progress that the staff is seeing in looking at when we're having conversations around equity, HR, benefits, compensation. Retirement benefits is another area where we're trying to really focus. Leave, just give an example, medical leave was really nice done with DC, and we expanded that to Maryland because we were like, well, we're going to apply the policy to all of our employees that, whether Maryland, DC, even though it's going to cost us, but we're doing these things trying to be fair, trying to really look at how to encourage retention. I think there's a road ahead of us. I'm hopeful, and I'm encouraged to just be being part of this conversation.
Thank you, Lupi. I think that that's a good level set as to how folks who are working in the sector and the space, particularly around direct services, are trying to meet multiple challenges. I wanted to go back to, one, that I think Mimi is going to be able to help us look at an opportunity potentially when you talked about, your youth workers and having that connection to the communities, the folks of color who are employed, having connections to the communities. We, in looking at the crisis, there's multiple things. There's where are we going to get our next pipeline, folks from? How are we going to attract those folks? How are we going to recruit and hire and on board? But even once they get into the chairs, and this speaks more to folks who are coming from diverse backgrounds and have lived expertise, whether it's frontline and all the way up to the C-suite. Once we bring these folks in, how are we supporting them from a retention and resiliency standpoint? And I know that Karen is going to speak a little bit more about the resiliency, but I want to invite Mimi to talk about the pipelining aspect of what she's been seeing, particularly around tapping into youth who can engender the trust of folks who you're trying to serve. How do we help build our bench strength around those?
Well, that was quite a lead up, Vic. I'm not entirely sure I'm going to be able to solve this for you because it's a really big challenge, and I have so much admiration for all of you and Lupi. I know we've talked before, but it's great to see you, and I feel like for all of the leaders out there too that have been grappling with all of the challenges for some time, I feel like giving you a hug, like all of you guys a hug, because it's not been easy for the staff and for the clients, but it's definitely also been, trying on the leadership as well. And there's a lot of challenges out there. I was gonna, just briefly, just with the youth field, that's the area that I work in. I come from also working directly, in youth programs and with young people. Like, this is already a challenging field to begin with. And if you have been around long enough, you'll remember, a lot of different efforts to professionalize the field and get, more sort of universal credentialing. That is still very much in the mix. I think that it would go a long way to helping programs to have that kind of shared ability to have somebody go through a community college program or a credentialing program and show up with the skills that you're going to need, whether they have a degree or not. As Lupi had said, I think that not requiring that degree is certainly something to think about. But the youth field is just and human services generally, but just generally very difficult to have a living wage. And, a lot of our youth workers are making $15, $16 an hour, maybe slightly higher now. But, that is a real challenge. And somebody mentioned in the chat box, housing. But there's also, the issues that have been around for a long time: transportation, childcare, housing, mental health supports. These are the same as they were 25 years ago. And we have not really moved the needle significantly on, I think, any of them in a way. And so those things are contributing factors to those challenges, both for our workers and certainly for our young people as well. Also, I just want to, shout out to those nonprofits that, in the youth field that are working in rural areas. Those, all of those things are compounded often. And, the smaller nonprofits are also struggling with, they don't have an HR department. They don't have a, somebody that they can turn to and say, okay, onboard this person. And, it is a lot of hats are worn in some of those smaller nonprofits that make it even more challenging when there is turnover. And then, I don't have to tell you all, but the revenue streams for, nonprofits are often not reliable. And so, those wages to say, well, let's just, raise wages, but you don't know what you're getting next year all the time. So that's a scary proposition for, finance departments, executive directors and boards out there to just, say, okay, let's just raise wages because, we don't know exactly what's around the corner. There has been an influx from some ARPA funding and some federal funding for sure, but it remains challenging. And there are also, programs that can't afford bringing on full-time folks. So, part-time and lack of benefits is not always attractive to, somebody that is looking for work, but those nonprofits aren't able to afford it. So it's not surprising that there's really high rates of turnover in this youth field. That there was a recent statistic that said that 45% of those that are coming into the field are in the jobs 1 year or less. And when you think about that, that is a lot of work to put in, onboarding somebody, bringing somebody on, and then having to go back and hire. It's also an expense. There's a older statistic that shows that it's like 35 to 50% of that, annual wage that it takes to actually bring somebody new on board. So it's not efficient. It's very, I'm so sorry, that was my phone. And it's, it's a struggle. And on top of that turnover rate, if you're working with young people, the research, it's pretty clear that one of the most significant factors in working with young people is having that one caring, reliable adult in their lives. And if you're having that kind of turnover, that also disrupts, of course, your programming and those relationships, which can be really damaging and can also, feed into, how we're working with those youth. So then that's like adding in the pandemic. We've, many more, I was working in homelessness when the pandemic hit. And so, our shelters, this was in Connecticut, our shelters had to be, halved or closed. So for all those folks that were working, it was a terrible, terrible struggle, and a terrible, terrible struggle for those clients and for, young people that were on the streets. So you're grappling with, the things that you all mentioned, sickness and vaccines, we've all lost people, I'm sure. And another, big thing in the youth field is certainly mental health. And I'm just coming from a U.S. Conference of Mayors where the Surgeon General did a whole session on loneliness. And the loneliness of our young people right now is not to be underestimated, and that the impact of that loneliness and that lack of social connection. And that makes, these hires and the staff even more important, because sometimes they're the only real friends that some of these young people have. And it's heartbreaking, the rates of suicidality and mental health struggles. We just did a national survey of youth employment programs and beyond about how, they're staffed and how well prepared they are to, help with the mental health crisis with young people. And we'll be coming out with that later in a few weeks. But, the preliminary results show that, we are not well prepared. We are not well staffed to grapple with this. mental health crisis that's happening with our young people. And I know all of you that are working with young people see that firsthand every day. So the challenges are enormous in terms of staffing, and managing young people that might have also been in school and that aren't in school, like the hours and all kinds of things related to that. There are enormous shortages, as I don't have to tell you, but that there was a statistic that of the Aftercare Alliance for after school programs that said that 57% basically responded that they were all worried about hiring. And so it's very, very real. Strategies to address it are, federal funding often has fixed rates. So how do we, get in there with federal funding and advocate? We do a lot of advocacy work, and, Vic as well. And so how do we band together to really make this as powerful as possible? Some folks have turned to like AARP and using seniors as staff, universities, community colleges, AmeriCorps, is out there. There's some programs that have utilized vets really well, especially working with some of the justice-involved youth. There's been some successful programs around that. And then, sharing trainings and sharing resources between nonprofits, which is not always, it sounds like it would be easy, but it's not always easy. And it's usually not very well funded to kind of create those ecosystems so we can be more efficient in how we use our own resources. Like, can we share an accountant? Can we share an HR department? Can we share an onboarding process? And I think what Vic had talked about in terms of, something that we're hoping for and that we're advocating for is really expanding a certification process for youth workers so that they can come to, we will be developing that workforce. And there's a, work that's happening right now around that, but really developing that workforce so that, youth programs aren't going to have to reinvent the wheel every time. And at the same time, they're still going to need consistent training and support. But there, so that there's enough out there so that, some resources can really be shared. So those are just, some thoughts, some things we're working on. We're doing a lot around youth leadership. And I think one of the coolest things that we can do, and it's not always easy, but for the youth that are served in these programs, how are we using them as part of that feeder into the workforce? So, young people that are in the programs, are we offering opportunities? And I know that a lot of you already do this and do this well, but I think that there's room for growth there for utilizing young people with lived experience and really bringing them into the program and having established pathways, not only into your own programs, but into other programs, within the community and supporting that across sectors.
Thank you, Mimi, for those sobering thoughts. What comes to mind is, the familiar Christian statement of the harvest is plenty, but the laborers few. And, beyond that, you mentioned, things like loneliness and some of the mental well-being issues that workers and, communities are just facing, which I think is awesome, set up for Karen to kind of weigh in here on some of those issues and what we might be able to think about. One, let's raise that issue. Bottom line is let's do to a much higher status. I go back to a meeting I was having some time ago when I first took the role, and I think it was our very first Human Resources Peer Council, and I had a brief conversation with one of my very good friends who is the chief operating officer at a New Orleans hospital, and he comes out of the crisis center of a few hospitals, and he said, Vic, if you could talk about anything when you're addressing folks in this area, let them know that our folks are having challenges with mental well-being, and particularly the effects that COVID has had. This was something that came out of the blue for many folks. And, it's already been mentioned that, again, if we polled people, there might be folks who have lost folks. People are dealing with real issues, and they have to, in many ways, put those bags down at the front door before they can come in and help serve others. So, Karen, I'll give it to you to talk about a little bit of your work, because I know it's really steeped in this area, and where there might be some opportunities for us to deal with this.
Thank you so much, Victor, and thank you to Lupi and Mimi and Denise for really just sharing important important information. I think Lupi, especially what I heard you sharing is, what we know is leaders and organizations have moved mountains, especially in the human services sector, have moved mountains to respond to what happened in March 2020, and showed incredible resilience in so many ways. And part of that list of priorities was has been to take care of staff. And that's to everyone's credit. But we do also know that even with those efforts, our workforce really has suffered a heavy toll over the past 27 months. There's lots of stats out there, but one I'll share from the O.C. Tanner Institute, which does research and education on culture, employee experience, and recognition. They have a report that they do every year, and they've reported declines in 5 of their 6 talent magnets. So in their 2022 report, they noted that a sense of purpose, sense of opportunity, and sense of appreciation have all declined across the organizations and the workforces that they include in their report. And we know that there's been increases in burnout and in other workforce concerns such as compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, and moral injury. So all that you've said is very present and right in front of us. It's not to say it wasn't there before, because our workforce has been doing complex work in ever-changing environments, working with people who have complex needs forever. So that it's not necessarily all new, but it has the urgency and the intensity of the needs of our workforce has changed since COVID. And as I kind of said I think I said in my introduction, we've learned a lot over these past 27 months. And the good news is, there are really things we can do to move towards a partnership with staff, really move away from that self-care piece or employee recognition piece, to partnering with staff to create environments in which staff can stay well, in which they can experience compassion resilience. I think that's the ultimate goal, compassion resilience, in which an individual who is working again in complex, ever-changing environments and working and partnering to serve people who have intense needs and are suffering in many ways, people who are doing that can stay well. So compassion resilience, is kind of the ultimate goal of creating that for our workforce. And that's what I want to talk about today. I think Mimi and others, the ongoing structural issues related to living wage, transportation, childcare are all just challenges that we need to continue to wrestle with to address. What I want to talk about today is and what we're working on at Social Current is that culture piece, that internal organizational work that we do with the people that we have in our organization. And this work, like the other work related to structural challenges, requires us to be innovative, curious, and courageous. And it's not necessarily fast or easy, but it is doable. And it definitely merits investment of time and resources, which I know you all understand, and everyone on this call has been prioritizing and trying to do. So I'm just going to get to, four areas. First of all, Social Current is doing this work. We have a current learning collaborative open for people to respond to join us if it is a fit for them, and that will start in September. So I can put that link in the chat. But when we're talking about working with organizations, these are the kinds of things that we focus on. One, I think it's important to understand that when we're working with staff, we need to marry both the neurosciences and what we understand about creating trust and compassion and empathy. So advancing brain science is one of our core foundational pieces, because we do a really good job, much better job than we used to, in understanding brain science for babies in utero, even before they're conceived, actually. And then the first 1,000 days, first 3 years, how we build healthy brains. But we don't talk about it in our workforce, when in fact, the brain mediates everything we think, do, and feel. So I think understanding how our brains in the most simple sense function, and how our internal states are, how are we feeling? Are we feeling alarmed or alert or even afraid? How that impacts our thinking. So if we're calm, we can use the smartest parts of our brain to communicate, create. And when an employer, when we feel unseen, overlooked, lonely, maybe threatened subtly, the thinking part of our brain becomes less available to us. So I think those those kinds of concepts are incredibly important. As Dr. Bruce Perry says, I've trained in his model. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Bruce Perry, but a brain-aware perspective helps me when I'm trying to understand people, and that is actually our work, trying to understand people. So we really encourage this brain-aware perspective, and there's concrete strategies that are relevant in every single interaction, like regulate, relate, reason. Very briefly, that means we quiet our lower brain, and then we can talk to people as human beings and find out how they're doing in their day, and then we can get to any conversation we need to get to, whether it's a to-do list or a difficult conversation, etc. So that piece is foundational, I think, and then that leads the way to all these other important things. Of course, equity, diversity, inclusion, which you've all done a really good job laying that out there. We need to center EDI. That's the way we talk about it, the acronym we use at Social Current. EDI practices into every part of this work. So that's complex, but and there's lots of pieces to that, but one example is making sure that any of our EDI work group, if we have an EDI committee, an EDI work group, is very much intertwined with our workforce resilience work group. So, things like we're curious about, like all of you noted, how the pandemic impacts people across all sectors and groups, that we're making sure everyone's invited to contribute to solutions, et cetera. Lots that we need to understand about that. And that has to be central to our work. I would argue that it's hard to do that if we don't, again, understand the concepts of brain science. Along that line, we have psychological safety. I don't know if you've heard about I'm guessing many have heard about psychological safety. Amy Edmondson out of Harvard really started our conversations around this, but that's a feeling of being able to share ideas, questions, or concerns, to be our authentic self at work. And feel safe to do so. So be able to do that without worrying about some kind of pushback, getting on some kind of invisible list, people thinking poorly of us, et cetera. It's not easy, and it's an evolutionary, cultural evolutionary process. So it happens over time. And like most of this work, it is the charge of leaders to make that happen. So senior leaders especially. So senior leaders need to, explain why we have to develop a psychologically safe environment, invite participation, set the stage for that, and then respond productively. That is, in fact, Google in 2016, maybe you're familiar, but they, in one of their studies, noted that psychological safety is their key to creating a healthy, resilient workforce. Along with that, we have positive workforce culture, which resilience at work. So an organization that has people who experience compassion and resilience, and an organization itself, they can adapt to the changing environments and stay nimble, and fail well, maybe is another way to say it, is highly dependent on a positive culture. One that reflects the organization's values and beliefs. So whatever values are on our website are being operationalized in our daily behavior all the time. And, this is the area where we focus on healthy expectations and clear boundaries, where we're making sure things are transparent, they're not unwritten. People understand what the expectations of boundaries are. This is where we talk about feedback loops, building trust, practicing empathy, etc. The last area I would talk about is building connection. And Mimi, you really noted this related to loneliness. It's the same for our workforce as it is for the people we serve. Again, the O.C. Tanner Institute notes that 45% of employees say the number of individuals they regularly interact with at work has decreased significantly over the past year, and 1 in 3 employees feel disconnected from their supervisor. When employees feel less connected to their workplace, to the culture of the organization, to the mission of the organization, the likelihood of effective, productive, impactful work drops like 90%. So it's very, very important to focus on connection. And, all of these concepts can be drilled down to specific activities, specific things we do. There's many practices that we can bring into the workforce to increase authenticity, increase the ability to have difficult conversations, increase our regulation where we stay out of our lower brains, etc. And I could talk a long time about all of those, but that's mostly what I wanted to talk about, Victor, is and everyone else, is this need for and real solutions for strengthening our partnership with our staff so that they feel heard, listened to, valued, and then together we can take these concrete actions to create a resilient workforce, a resilient place where people can experience compassion, resilience. And if it's okay, I'll put our learning collaborative.
Please do.
Just
in the
link in the
chat.
chat. And if anyone has
Thank
any
you.
questions about that or anything related to this topic, I'd love to connect. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. Before I give it over to Nicole, I know that we had this originally scheduled to the main session to stop at 1:30 with a half an hour Q&A. This is too rich of a conversation to short shrift. But I think what has happened here is that because we've had such a rich conversation, I'm probably going to be reaching out to each one of our panelists to maybe do a singular session on each one of the areas of expertise so that we can, again, continue this conversation. So what I would encourage folks on the call to do, because we're probably going to run into the Q&A part, please start populating the chat now with your questions so that we can capture those and then circulate them through our panelists and some of our other experts associated with the assembly and get those answers to you. It might come directly or might come as an invitation to another one of our sessions where you can really have that addressed. So with that said, I'll give it over to you, Nicole. I think this has been a good build up. We've set the stage. We've talked about how it's really impacting some of our folks on the ground. I really appreciate Karen bringing in not just another dynamic of the issue, but we're now beginning to talk about potential solutions and work around how we can address this. And I think, Nicole, you might be able to help us, so what can we do? What's being done that we can help support, if not lead?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I kind of mentioned in my my first set of comments, I think that we're at a point when the role that we all need to play is to make sure that we realize that going back to a status quo is a disservice to a lot of workers, and that we need to make sure that we're developing workforces that are sustainable and have career paths and career ladders for folks. In terms of the direct care workforce that I specifically have been talking about, but just generally, it's important when we're thinking about anything, whether it's, broad efforts to expand, increase the minimum wage even. That's a really important thing. But if we don't also think about human service industry workers also having a correlating wage increase, then all we're doing is exacerbating problems. For example, when it comes to the direct care workers that do support people with disabilities and aging adults, the majority of those funds are paid for with public dollars, state and federal dollars through state and federal Medicaid programs. And because of that, their wages are tied to a very wonky Medicaid rate. And so actually, if you don't provide funding to enhance those rates, what you do is make it where the situation is now, where folks can make more money working at Costco or Taco Bell than they do providing this life-giving work. And so it's really about being mindful of the full scope of things when the policy discussions are happening. The good news is that for both childcare workers and direct care workers, there is an opportunity to see some really big investments. We saw short-term investments come through the American Rescue Plan Act dollars to do things like what was mentioned earlier, kind of the short-term hazard payments, back pay, things like that. But we are in the middle of budget reconciliation negotiations that include significant investments in childcare and home and community-based services to raise wages for those workers, so that we don't see that disparity between these types of jobs, these human services jobs, and other jobs. All jobs are important. All jobs we should be elevating, but we don't want to create a multi-tiered system, which is kind of unfortunately what we've done. So the good news is those investments are on the table. And because we do have this understanding of the fact that, for example, 90% of older adults, 90% of people with disabilities want to be able to stay in their homes and communities, want to be able to age in place, then we know that there's a built-in market. And so we have to continue to make sure folks get engaged in this work and make sure that it's an understanding that everybody is going to, hopefully, if you're lucky enough to age, then you're going to need this type of support. And so everybody has skin in the game, for lack of a better term, to fixing this problem. And so whether it's the budget reconciliation package that's currently being negotiated, and then in next Congress, we certainly expect to see investments in all types of worker issues, because we have to continue to build equity into the workforce system overall. And that also includes, I would be remiss to say, also includes making sure that we're supporting people with disabilities in the workforce. And making sure that there's a spot for them, whether it's in direct care work or in any other type of work, because that also is about economic stability for folks. So I can close it out there so that we do have more time for questions. I'm happy to wrap it up. But there are going to be big opportunities. I mentioned the federal level, but also at the state level, whether it's those local initiatives around raising wages, and also investing state dollars into the programs that ultimately pay the wages for these workers. So I know at Caring Across Generations, we have work that we're directly leading on in California, in Illinois, in Georgia, and in Michigan, to also have those state dollars investment. Because while there are big problems, which means we need federal investments, actually state dollars and local county dollars even can make just as big of a difference, because we are talking about such a big problem. So there's a lot of opportunities to do a lot of good advocacy at the state level as well as the federal level. So I'll wrap it up with those action points.
No, I appreciate that, Nicole. And, we're committed at the Assembly to, help in those areas where it makes sense for us to participate in those conversations, to sit at the table. I think when we talk about and we use the term national, well, what is national? about the Human Services Assembly. It just means that we have partners and organizations throughout the nation, not so much simply sitting in Washington, D.C., thinking about it at the federal level. It's where can we help leverage the folks who are working in our communities, whether it's rural, suburban, or urban, to help support some of those localized or regionalized efforts. So though you truncated your talk here, that's going to continue, and we invite folks to help support you, and then us as we're doing the same for you. So what I'd like to do now is simply, thank each one of you for participating. Again, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience, varying perspectives that have raised the issue, given color to the issue, but hopefully have set us into a mindset of there are things that we can do in our own areas of influence and efforts to begin abating some of the crisis that many of us are facing at our organizations. And so, I'm hopeful and I'm excited, to be a part of this work and to be in the role and the position that I'm in large part because I have the opportunity to sit with folks like you, but also to have the guidance and support, again, of folks who are part of the assembly, the itself, and the leadership. And so that's kind of my segue to our new board chair, Darlene Bailey, who is going to kind of give us a round out of remarks with the theme of staying in good trouble. So I am totally excited to have her now as our new chair. Looking forward to the work that we're going to do together, the energy that she brings, the vast amount of knowledge that, especially particularly when it comes to, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how, from a social worker standpoint and beyond all of the other things, because she's a wonderful academic as well. And so I get to learn from her and sit at the feet of wisdom. So Darlene, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about how we can stay in good trouble.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you, everyone. I didn't even realize my camera was on as I was taking copious notes and learning, and I'm hearing all this familiar language and reframing and the excitement. So don't sit at my feet, my friend, sit at my shoulder because we're moving forward. Sit at my feet, you're gonna get kicked because we're moving. Okay?
Fair enough, fair enough.
All good. So apologies for having had the camera on, but as you heard from Victor, at the very beginning, and I think it was Karen who also called him Victor. The rest, some other folks call him Vic. I call him Victor. Last year, our Health and Human Services Secretary, Xavier Becerra, gave us a challenge. And it really wasn't a huge challenge for us because we've been heading in this direction and trying to just amplify the good trouble that we've been trying to make for our 99 years young. As Jeff said at the beginning, DEI, EDI, REI, whatever you want to call it, it's all about equity and fairness and social justice and social change, all coming through social action. So John Lewis made some remarks back in March 1st, 2020, and he talked about how, I'm going to read this now, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America. And that's our charge. That's our call. And he said that, speaking about 5 key ways of doing it. One is getting out the vote. The other is what we're doing right now, speaking truth to power and not worrying about if you're too young to do that. He said, you're never too young and you're never too old. As long as you can keep moving, just keep moving. Never give up. And also pay attention to who's standing with you. So we here at the National Human Services Assembly are calling on you. We're calling you in because you've already called yourselves out by the work that you've been doing. And it's just been incredible just to hear what the work the panelists have been doing and to hear the stories of some of the other member organizations. We're going to be calling on even more of you to join us, to actively join us, and to bring with you other people to help us move forward. yes, neuroscience, yes, social psychology, and yes, social work. And I've got 3 calls to action that I'd like to share as a fellow social worker who has a doctorate in business. Pulling those 2 things together, I can't help but have a multi-sectorial perspective here. And as a social worker, we know it starts with ourselves, right? That's our primary tool. It starts with ourselves. So our first call to action that I'd like to invite you into is to start with yourself and to start with your organization. And Mimi and Karen and Nicole and Denise and Lupe, you're going to hear the underscoring of some of the points that you have made. And I'm hoping to even build upon them. But I mean, you all, my notes, I've got sheets and sheets of paper here. Okay. The first is starting right where you're at, which is what we also do, right? Start where the client's at, start where you're at, engage in the dialogue with your frontline workers. Really talk with them. They're not just the wind beneath our wings, they are the wings, okay? And as Paulo Freire, a late colleague and friend of mine, talked about the whole concept of dialogue, through having those kind of engaged conversations, those honest dialogues, you're risking to learn something new, you're risking to be changed, and you're risking to actually engage in courageous conversations where you co-create ways that will make the necessary change. Find out what's essential from them, for creating job, quote unquote, satisfaction. Compensation, yes, but there are also some other reasons that people are sticking now, even during the times, everything you've heard, even with all that's happening, people are still staying with us. Why is that? Find out why. We know this from when we work with volunteers, right? We find ways, since it isn't about compensation, what keeps them there? Find ways, treat your colleagues as volunteers in that sense, with the same grace, the same care, the same making certain they know they're valued and valuable that we do with our unpaid staff colleagues. Work with them, be with them, join with them the same way. Take a look at not just your staffing and your structure, your onboarding and your retention policies, but also pay attention to all the ways that you line up. How are people showing up in your organizations? Most people want to have some sense of development, some sense of forward movement. Create those spaces for them to move into. People, and I'm saying this with my educator's hat on, okay, admittedly, people like also getting certificates. Come up with ways that they can not only get more tools, and yeah, they may leave you, but they'll also be ready to move into positions of greater positions of power and authority. It's time for us to go beyond our old way of thinking about individual resilience. I mean, actually, I've started to dislike that word resilience because it reminds me so much of pulling myself up, quote unquote, by my bootstraps. But as hopefully now my new friend has talked about, compassion resilience. And that requires us to take a look at not just the individual, but the organization, how the organization is going to foster the resilience. So it's not just focusing on the individual. Number 2, call to action. Look outside of your organization, but not necessarily too far out for right now, not too far away. Think about those partnerships. Think about ways, those collaborative actions that may cross some sectors, but ways to further, quote unquote, compensate our talent. Group healthcare plans, seek those out. Seek out packages for families, seek out packages where there may even be some opportunities to share, as someone already said, transportation costs, onboarding costs. That money then can be repurposed from your budget and used to further compensate, financially compensate as well. There are child and elder care assistants in all of our communities, people that love doing this work. Find ways to bring them into your organization and then have them help take care of some of the family members of some of your colleagues, some of your workers. So it's a win-win-win. share your processes, share your opportunities, and think about, we talk about credible messengers, think about opportunities to actually help your consumers transition into colleagues. Those would just be a couple of the ideas that some of you mentioned, and just want to underscore and build upon further. And last but not least, in terms of call out, just because of time, and I'm trying to talk as quickly as I can, seek out to reach out to cross the lines, to cross the disciplines, to really talk about what we usually call strange bedfellows. We have found, I work at the more the macro end. I'm a licensed individual clinician, but I work and play and thrive on the macro end, and only academia separates it, because the real world, it's about the client system, right? So if we think about the macro end, what I'm doing right now with some folks is bringing in some of the other organizations that are also in that area, but they don't call themselves, they don't have the titles that we would easily recognize as being kindred others. Seek out those folks. They may not have the quote unquote nonprofit status. They may not be in a faith-based educational sector, but they're focusing on the same kinds of issues. So seek them out. Don't let their titles and don't let the disciplines throw you. Remember that there is power in numbers. And the more that we can use what some of us call a blue ocean strategy, which is one of unity and coming together, as opposed to a red ocean, which truly is about bloody competition, where you seek out an enemy, the more we can try to find the common ground, the further we'll be able to take our organizations and everyone else that, again, may be a strange bedfellow, but nonetheless shares the same core values that we have. I want to just say two other quick things. That, first of all, I want to say that silence and inaction right now are not options. We do not have the luxury of doing nothing. At the risk of a double negative, Shakespeare got away with it, so I'm going to get away with it too. I want to say that this is our work, this is our time, and everything that's led up to it tells us that this is our destiny. And my friends, if we don't step into this, there's going to be a hole, there's going to be a void, and more people are going to fall through this crack. So as John Lewis said, to close as I began, speak up, speak out, and yes, get in the way. We would talk about it in terms of disruption. We would talk about it in terms of disrupting the old, the traditional, the historic, pulling out some of the good that comes from the past, but also disrupting the old narratives and really move forward together. Really move forward in a way that will make a difference for not only the people that we work with, but the people that we serve. As one of my incredible mentors, who is 106 years old, who says to me when I and others meet with her every Saturday afternoon, Frances Hesselbein, to serve is to live. And we all get that. Now's the time to spread that good news in the name of good trouble. So thank you again, Mimi and Nicole, and thank you again, Karen and Lupe, and thank you, Denise. And thank you, Victor. We're on our way. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this incredible time today. We've only, in the name of the Carpenters, just begun.
Thank you so much, Darlene, for that. It's both inspirational, but it's also an important charge to all of us to continue to do the work. Last year, Secretary Becerra left us with get into good trouble. And this year, I'm proud to say that I'm going to take something you just said as our theme going forward, which is get in the way.
Yes.
We're going to get in the way. We're going to be disruptors. We're going to challenge the status quo because those are active things that we can do. So I really do want to thank you for setting the foundation as we move into our next 100 years, with you as our leader now, and the rest of us being co-leaders, like you said, standing at your shoulder and helping to move this work forward. We do have 10 minutes left. If there are, and we haven't seen any questions in the chat, but again, encourage you to reach out right now if there is something burning. If not, what's going to happen after this, as we wrap this up and summarize this, we will be sending you invitations to our future conversations where many of the things that you've heard here today will be discussed in more depth, and with more insight, and hopefully with your participation, because this is a collaborative effort. Today we convened. Going forward, we're going to collaborate. And so we want you to join us at those tables to help drive this work forward. If there are no questions, which I'm still seeing none, I am going to give people back their day of 10 minutes early. Ending early is never an issue, and it's always a good thing if, in fact, you have covered what you believe you needed to cover. And I do believe that we've done a fantastic job here today, in no small part, not only to our panelists, but to our board, who kind of set the tone and raised this issue as something we needed to address. But also to my crack staff and my colleagues, with the Assembly, who have been keeping me on point. And these things are never easy. Sending me message in the background saying you're moving your cursor too much. So there's always more that goes on that meets the eye, and I'm so appreciative. We've heard the word service a great deal, and I approach my personal work and my professional work from a position of service leadership. Because that's what's important. That's what helps me, and what probably helps many of you sleep well at night, knowing that we're serving. And we're in service to others. So I'll leave it there. Really excited for the next year. Hopefully as we celebrate our centennial, knock on, I don't have any wood here, but the fake marble, that we'll be meeting in person next year as we celebrate that. Looking forward to that. And again, thank you for joining us here at our 2022 annual meeting.
Thank you, Victor. Stay well, everyone.
Stay well.
Take good care.
Bye-bye, all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.